They say childbirth changes a woman, but nobody ever warned me how much. When I carried my daughter inside me, I thought the sleepless nights, swollen ankles, and morning sickness would be the hardest part. But the truth is, what came after left the deepest mark. I don't mean stretch marks or weight gain. I mean something that stripped the very color from my skin. My pregnancy wasn't easy. I was young, married, and determined to hold everything together. But stress followed me everywhere. I worked late into my second trimester, still cooking and cleaning, trying to keep my husband happy while preparing for the baby. By the time I went into labor, my body was exhausted, running on fumes. I remembered the delivery being long, the kind of birth where every contraction feels like it might break you in half. But I pushed through because I wanted my daughter to arrive safely. For a while, it seemed like I had survived the storm. I went home with a healthy little girl in my arms. My husband, Leonard, seemed proud, and my family congratulated me for being strong. But then the strange spots appeared. At first, I thought they were stress rashes, just little patches of lighter skin on my hands and around my mouth. My mother told me it was probably nothing, maybe postpartum hormones. I wanted to believe her, but the patches didn't go away. They grew, slowly, almost cruelly, until one morning I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Doctors gave it a name, vitiligo, an autoimmune disorder where the body turns against itself, stripping the pigment from your skin. They explained how childbirth and stress could trigger it, how once it starts, there's no guaranteed way to stop it. I sat there, nodding, but inside I was screaming. How could bringing life into the world take the life out of my skin? I tried creams. I tried covering it with makeup. I even tried avoiding the sun because they said it could make the contrast worse. But nothing could hide the truth. People noticed. Some whispered. Some stared openly. And worst of all, Leonard began to pull away. The man who once told me I was beautiful every morning started turning his face when I leaned in for a kiss. I knew it wasn't just fatigue or stress between us. It was shame. My condition had become a mirror of his shallow love. Still, I carried on. I told myself my skin didn't define me. I had a baby girl who needed me, and if she saw me crumble, she would think her mother was weak. I refused to give her that image. I held her in my arms at night, rocking her back and forth, whispering promises I barely believed myself. Promises that no matter what happened, I would stand strong. Some days, I felt like I was living inside two bodies, one that bore the marks of disease, and another that had to project confidence for the sake of my child. I became an expert at silence, at walking past cruel comments with my head lifted high. But let me tell you something. That silence had weight, and I carried it for years. My name is Marjorie Ellis, and this is the story of how a condition I never asked for became the very reason my own daughter turned against me. Before I go on, let me pause for a second. If you've ever felt judged for something beyond your control, whether it was your body, your skin, or your circumstances, then you know a piece of what I've lived through. If you're watching right now and you stand with me, type 1 in the comments or just tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how many of you understand that pain, because my story doesn't stop with vitiligo. That was just the beginning, the first scar in a journey that would later cut far deeper. When I first noticed Leonard pulling away, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we were new parents, sleepless nights, and dirty diapers had stolen the romance from our home. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. But deep down, I knew it was more than exhaustion. It was the way he looked at me, or rather, the way he stopped looking at me. At first, it was subtle. He stopped holding my hand in public. He started turning his face when I leaned in to kiss him. He'd leave earlier for work, come home later, and when he did, his eyes slid past me like I was furniture. Once, I asked him if he was okay, if maybe he was stressed. He said nothing was wrong, but his silence spoke louder than words. It wasn't long before the excuses began. I'm tired. Not tonight. I've got a lot on my mind. Each phrase pushed me further away, until nights in our bed felt like two strangers lying inches apart, but separated by miles. The intimacy we once shared was gone, replaced by a coldness that seeped into every corner of our marriage. Then came the comments. They weren't direct insults, but little daggers slipped between sentences. Maybe you should try some of that cream the doctor gave you. Or, people say these things can spread if you don't take care of yourself. I laughed them off in front of him, but inside, I was crumbling. How do you explain to a man that the one thing he despises most about you is the one thing you can't change? I tried harder. I bought new clothes, hoping he would see the woman he once loved. I spent money on expensive makeup, layering foundation over the pale patches, even though the heat made it streak. I cooked his favorite meals, kept the house spotless, did everything a wife could do. But nothing worked because the problem wasn't the house or the meals or even me. It was his inability to love a woman whose beauty no longer fit his definition of perfection. I will never forget the day it became undeniable. We were invited to a neighborhood barbecue, and Leonard insisted we sit apart. When I asked why, he mumbled something about wanting to catch up with the guys. Later, I overheard him telling someone that his wife wasn't feeling well and decided to stay home even though I was sitting just a few feet away. That night, I realized I had become invisible to the man who once vowed to cherish me. Soon after, I started noticing his phone habits. The late-night messages, the secretive smiles, the way he angled his screen away whenever I walked by. I didn't need to snoop to know what was happening. I could feel it. His heart, his loyalty, his desire had already left me. The final blow came one evening when he sat me down at the kitchen table. He didn't hold my hand or even look me in the eye. He just said, "Marjorie, I can't do this anymore. I need normalcy. I need a woman who looks whole." That word, whole, cut deeper than anything else. In his eyes, my vitiligo made me broken. Less than a wife. Less than a woman. The papers followed quickly after. A blur of signatures and stamped envelopes that ended a decade of marriage with cold efficiency. No therapy, no attempt to salvage what we had built. Just a man chasing what he thought was perfection. And he found it. Or, at least, that's what he told himself. Within months, he was with a younger woman, someone whose skin was smooth and unmarked, someone he could show off like a trophy. I wanted to hate her, but she wasn't my enemy. She was just the proof of what Leonard really valued. Appearances. He didn't care about loyalty or sacrifice or the years I had stood by his side. All he cared about was whether the woman on his arm made him look good. And once I stopped fitting that picture, he discarded me like a worn-out garment. The divorce should have broken me, but in a strange way, it freed me. I stopped living for a man who could never see beyond the surface, I poured my energy into raising Desiree, into making sure she had every opportunity one never did. I promised myself that her life would not be defined by shallow love or fragile loyalty. What I didn't know then was that the same man who abandoned me would one day poison her mind against me. My scars weren't enough for him, and eventually he convinced my daughter they shouldn't be enough for her either. After Leonard walked out, I had two choices: collapse under the weight of betrayal or stand tall for the little girl looking up at me. I chose the second, not because it was easier, but because Desiree deserved a mother who wouldn't let heartbreak define her. Raising her alone wasn't simple. I carried the scars of my skin and the whispers of neighbors who thought they were whispering softly enough. In the grocery store, I'd catch mothers pulling their children a little closer, as if vitiligo was contagious. At school events, other parents smiled politely but never asked me to join their circles. I could feel the invisible line they drew, one I was never meant to cross. But I learned to walk through those moments with my head high. When Desiree asked me why people stared, I told her, they're only curious, baby. Not everyone understands difference. I never let her see my tears. Those came at night when she was asleep, and the house was quiet enough for me to hear the ache in my own chest. Work became my refuge. I poured myself into every job I took, no matter how small. At first, I worked in administration for a local office, balancing schedules and managing budgets. Later, I picked up part-time accounting work for small businesses. Numbers made sense to me in a way people often didn't. Numbers didn't stare. They didn't judge. They rewarded discipline, and discipline was something I had in abundance. Every extra dollar I earned, I saved. I cut corners in ways Desiree never saw. I wore the same shoes for 3 years. I sewed up dresses instead of buying new ones. I skipped vacations, skipped luxuries, skipped everything except what my daughter needed. Her school fees were paid on time. Her lunches were packed with care. If a school trip came up, I made sure she never had to sit at home and feel left out. Then came one decision that changed the course of my life, and hers. Around 2010, a colleague mentioned Tesla to me. At that time, people laughed about electric cars. Some said it would never catch on, but I had a gut feeling. Something told me this was worth the risk. I took a small portion of my savings, money I could have spent on fixing the house or buying new clothes, and I invested it. The years that followed proved me right. At first, the shares crept upward, barely noticeable. But by the time Desiree was entering her teenage years, those numbers had multiplied beyond what I ever expected. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't change how I lived. I still drove the same car, still clipped coupons, still skipped luxuries. But quietly, in the background, I was building a safety net strong enough to hold us both. Desiree grew up not knowing the depth of the sacrifices I made. To her, life seemed stable. She had new clothes, celebrated birthdays, and never had to question if the lights would stay on. That was my gift to her, to make struggle invisible, even when it consumed me. What kept me going was her smile. Every graduation photo, every school performance, every time she looked at me with pride in her eyes, those moments reminded me that being a single mother didn't make me less. It made me more resourceful, more resilient, more determined to give her the kind of life I never had. Sometimes people asked how I managed, how I raised a child alone while carrying the stigma of my skin. I told them the truth. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. You learn to stop listening to what the world says about you. You learn to focus on what really matters. And for me, that was Desiree. I thought in my heart that all the sacrifices would one day return as gratitude, that the little girl I clothed, fed, and nurtured would grow into a woman who cherished me. I didn't know that my investments, my hard work, and even my love would later be used as the very tools of betrayal. But for that season, while it lasted, it was just me and her against the world. And I carried that role with pride. If there's one thing motherhood teaches you, it's how to hold joy and pain in the same hand. Even with all the whispers about my skin, even with the empty space Leonard left behind, Desiree was my constant light. Every milestone she reached felt like proof that my sacrifices weren't in vain. I remember her first day of kindergarten. She was so small, clutching her little backpack like it carried the weight of the world. I walked her to the classroom door, and for the first time, she let go of my hand with confidence instead of fear. When she turned back to wave, her smile told me that no matter how different I looked to the world, to her, I was still home. That wave stayed with me for days. Birthdays were sacred in our house. I didn't always have much, but I found ways to make each one special. One year, I saved for months to buy her the doll house she'd been dreaming about. Another year, I baked until midnight, making a cake shaped like the letter D. When she blew out her candles, her eyes always found mine. She would run over, wrap her little arms around me, and whisper, "Thank you, Mommy." Those two words were worth more than diamonds. Graduations became my trophies. I can still see her in her elementary school cap and gown, the tassel too long for her face. I cried louder than anyone when they called her name. Middle school, high school, each ceremony was a reminder that I was raising a daughter who was smart, determined, and respectful. She always looked for me in the crowd, always smiled when she found me. And in those moments, I forgot the stares, the whispers, the way people's eyes slid over my skin. All I saw was my daughter's pride reflecting back at me. As she grew older, our bond seemed unbreakable. She would sit with me in the evenings, helping me cook, telling me about her friends and crushes. She never mocked me, never treated me like less. If anything, she defended me. I once overheard her snapping at a classmate who made a cruel comment about my vitiligo. "That's my mom," she said firmly, "and she's beautiful." My heart nearly burst hearing those words. Teenage years can be difficult for many mothers, but Desiree never gave me reason to worry. She respected curfews, kept her grades up, and never raised her voice at me. I thought I had beaten the odds, raising a teenager alone without rebellion or bitterness. I told myself it was because she had watched me struggle and learned to value sacrifice. Looking back now, those memories cut the deepest, because I truly believed I had built something solid, something no outside voice could break. I believed all the love I poured into her, all the birthdays, the late-night talks, the whispered prayers, had created a foundation too strong for betrayal. But betrayal doesn't announce itself in childhood. It waits. It waits until you've built your hopes sky high. It waits until you're certain you've done everything right. And then it comes crashing down, not from a stranger, but from the very child you thought would never wound you. Still, when I look back at those years, the milestones, the hugs, the smiles, I remind myself they were real. They weren't fake. They weren't an act. Desiree loved me once, openly and fiercely. And that's what made the shift later so unbearable. Because when your enemies betray you, it stings. But when your child does, it breaks something in you that can never fully heal. The first time I noticed a shift in Desiree, it was so small I brushed it aside. She had started spending more weekends with her father. At first, I thought it was harmless. After all, she was grown now, and every child deserves the chance to know both parents. I didn't want my bitterness with Leonard to become hers. If she wanted to reconnect, I wouldn't stand in the way. What I didn't realize was that opening that door also gave him the chance to poison her heart. Leonard had always been a smooth talker. It was part of what drew me to him in the first place before his love turned shallow. He knew how to charm people, how to twist words so that lies felt like truth. And now, he used that same gift on our daughter. He didn't attack me openly. He planted seeds instead. Your mom has been through a lot, but sometimes people with her condition, they carry burdens you don't want around your marriage. At first, Desiree defended me, brushing it off. But seeds don't sprout overnight. They sit in the soil, waiting. Then came the so-called pastor. Leonard had aligned himself with one of those men who dressed in expensive suits, shouted loud enough to shake walls, and knew just enough scripture to make himself sound important. I'd heard of him before. People said he specialized in deliverance from generational curses. I never paid him any attention, but now he had found his way into my daughter's ears. Desiree began repeating little things I knew didn't come from her. Mom, maybe you should pray more against bad luck. Or, some people say vitiligo is a sign of spiritual warfare. I would look at her and wonder where she got such ideas. I never taught her that. I raised her to believe in resilience, in science, in faith without fear. But she was listening to voices that twisted my life into superstition. The pastor reinforced what Leonard had already whispered, that my skin was not just different, but dangerous, that it could taint her marriage, block her blessings, even follow her children. Lies, all of it. But when a child hears something often enough, especially from people she thinks she should trust, it becomes easier to believe than the truth she's known all her life. I began noticing changes in her behavior. She stopped hugging me as tightly. She hesitated before inviting me to certain gatherings. Once, she asked me not to come to a church program, claiming the pastor said it was for young couples only. Later, I found out other parents had been there, even mothers older than me. That was when I understood. She was embarrassed, not by my presence, but by my skin. It was a slow unraveling, like watching a rope fray, one thread at a time. I could still see the girl who once defended me in front of classmates, who smiled at me from graduation stages. But layer by layer, that girl was being covered by the words of a father who had abandoned me and a pastor who saw profit in superstition. I wanted to confront Leonard, but what good would it do? He would deny it, turn the conversation, maybe even use it as proof that I was bitter. I wanted to confront the pastor too, but I knew men like him. They thrived on conflict, twisting every challenge into evidence of their so-called anointing. So I prayed quietly, hoped silently, and waited for Desiree to see through it. But instead, the gap between us grew wider. She still smiled, still spoke with respect, but there was distance now. A distance I couldn't close, no matter how many times I reminded her of my sacrifices. What hurt most wasn't the words of Leonard or the pastor. It was realizing my daughter was starting to believe them. The same child who once called me beautiful was now questioning whether I could bring misfortune into her life. And that doubt, once it took root, would eventually bear the bitterest fruit. When Desiree told me she was getting married, my heart swelled in a way I hadn't felt in years. For all the loneliness I had endured, for all the whispers I had walked past, here was a moment to celebrate my only child stepping into her future. I knew immediately that I wanted her day to be nothing less than extraordinary. I had been saving for years, not just in cash, but in investments I rarely spoke about. Those Tesla stocks I bought back when people laughed at electric cars had grown into something substantial. I didn't flaunt it, but I knew what I had. And for me, there was no question about how it should be used. My daughter deserved a wedding that matched her dreams, and I was going to make sure she had it. The planning began quickly. Desiree had always had a taste for elegance, and I wanted to give her that. The venue she chose was a stunning hall with high ceilings, chandeliers that shimmered like crystal rain, and enough space to hold the hundreds of guests she insisted on inviting. The deposit alone was more than some people make in a year, but I paid it without hesitation. Then came the dress. I watched her eyes light up when she tried on the gown, a fitted, lace-covered beauty that hugged her frame and trailed into a long, flowing train. It wasn't cheap, but the look on her face was priceless. I wrote the check gladly. That was my baby, and she deserved to walk down the aisle feeling like royalty. Catering was next. She wanted a menu that ranged from soul food to fine dining, a spread big enough to make every guest feel like they were at a feast. When the planner gave me the numbers, I paused only for a second before transferring the funds. I remembered the days I clipped coupons, the nights I sewed dresses instead of buying new ones. Those sacrifices had led to this moment, being able to give her the abundance I once only dreamed about. Flowers, decorations, the band, the photographer. Each bill that came, I handled. I didn't complain. I didn't remind her how much it was costing me. I wanted her to enjoy her engagement season without stress. Even when she suggested booking a premium honeymoon package, flights, 5-star resort, the works, I nodded, made the call, and paid for it in full. I was determined that her new life would start in comfort and celebration. By the time the calculations were done, I had covered nearly 80% of the entire wedding. Friends who knew the details were shocked. "Why would you spend that much?" they asked. My answer was always the same: because she's my only child. Because when you carry a child alone, when you endure whispers and stares for years, when you hold her hand through every milestone, you want to give her the best send-off into her future. And truthfully, I didn't see it as a loss. This was love in action. This was me proving once again that no matter what Leonard had whispered into her ear, no matter what that so-called pastor had preached, I was her foundation. I wanted the world to see her walk into marriage not as a girl from a broken home, but as a woman whose mother had given her everything possible. Every receipt I signed, every transfer I made carried a silent prayer that this day would remind Desiree of my love, that when she stood before her guests, she would see not just flowers and lights, but the sacrifices behind them. What I didn't know was that while I was building her dream, she was building a wall between us. I thought money could secure her happiness. I didn't realize it would only give her a bigger stage to humiliate me. If there was one thing Desiree had mastered, it was appearances. To to anyone looking in from the outside. We seemed closer than ever during those months of wedding preparations. She called me often, updated me on details, and even joked with me like she used to. She never raised her voice, never showed an ounce of rebellion. If anything, she looked like the picture of a grateful daughter. She would hug me when I came over. She would laugh at my stories when we sat with the event planner. At fittings for her gown, she'd hold my hand and spin in front of the mirror, asking, "Mom, do you think I look beautiful?" And I would answer with tears in my eyes, "You look perfect." I didn't know then that those same lips, smiling so sweetly, were carrying words of rejection behind closed doors. You see, Desiree never openly mocked me. Not once. She never rolled her eyes at my vitiligo, never called me names, never pushed me away in public. That was the mask. Her surface, respect, made me believe she was still on my side. It blinded me to the truth that her heart was shifting. I look back now and realize the signs were there, but they were so subtle I missed them. Sometimes she hesitated before inviting me to meetings with her fiancé's family. She would say, "Mom, you don't have to come if you're tired," even though she knew I wouldn't miss it for the world. Other times, when I offered to pray with her, she would smile politely but decline, saying she already had her pastor praying for her. I told myself it was just her growing independence. I had no idea those refusals were part of a deeper wedge being driven between us. Her outward behavior gave me comfort. She still brought me flowers on Mother's Day. She still kissed my cheek at family gatherings. She still told her friends I was her rock. And I clung to those gestures, thinking they proved my sacrifices had built a bond that couldn't be broken. But respect on the surface means nothing if the foundation is rotting beneath. Behind that smile, she was listening to Leonard's whispers, nodding at a pastor's superstitions, letting their poison soak into her mind. And because she never showed it in front of me, I kept believing we were fine. I had no reason to doubt her. I had paid for her wedding dress, her venue, her honeymoon. I had spent hours driving her to appointments, helping her pick flowers, listening to her dreams of married life. Why would I suspect betrayal from the same daughter who still said, "Thank you, Mom," every time I swiped my card or signed a contract? There's a cruel kind of blindness that comes with love. You want so badly to believe the best of your child that you overlook what doesn't feel right. You explain away the distance, excuse the odd remarks, convince yourself that everything is fine because to admit otherwise would break your heart. That was me in those weeks leading up to the wedding, smiling, trusting, and completely unaware that while I was stitching her dream day together, she was preparing to stitch me out of it. It was just days before the wedding when Desiree came over to my house. She sat on the same couch where we had shared countless mother-daughter talks, the same place she once curled up as a little girl with homework spread across her lap. I made tea, thinking it would be one of those tender visits where we talked about nerves, last-minute details, and maybe even the hopes she had for her new life. But there was something in her eyes that day, not the sparkle of excitement I expected, but a shadow. She spoke carefully, almost rehearsed, as though she had practiced the words in front of a mirror. "Mom," she began, "you can come to my wedding." I smiled, already knowing I wouldn't miss it for the world. But then she kept going. "But you can't sit in front, and you can't be in the family photos. Only people with uniform skin color can snap with us." Her words didn't just fall into the room, they detonated. I felt them tear through the years of sacrifices, through the birthdays and graduations, through every late-night prayer I had whispered for her. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Surely my daughter, my Desiree, didn't just say that, but she had. And she sat there, looking at me with the same face I had raised, the same lips that once called me beautiful, now shaping words that cut me down to nothing more than an embarrassment she wanted to hide. In that moment, every sacrifice flashed before me. The nights I went without food, so she could eat. The stocks I sold, so she could have her dream wedding. The prayers I prayed over her while she slept. All of it dismissed in one sentence because my skin was no longer uniform. I should have cried. I should have screamed. I should have asked her how she could betray me like that. But instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. A calm born not of peace, but of something sharper, resolve. I looked at her, my face steady, my voice soft. "Okay, baby." That's all I said. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew right then that I would not fight her with words. I would not beg her to see my worth. If she could not remember who I was, then I would remind her, not in private, not in whispers, but in front of the very people she wanted to impress. She smiled faintly, relieved I hadn't argued, and soon after, she left. She thought she had silenced me. She thought her words had reduced me to quiet acceptance. But what she didn't know was that behind my calm, "Okay, baby," a plan had already begun to take shape. That night, I sat alone in my room, the silence thick around me. I replayed her words again and again. Only people with uniform skin color can snap with us. The cruelty of it burned, but beneath the pain was something stronger. I would not let her shame me into a corner after I had given her everything. I picked up the phone and called the one person who could help me turn my resolve into action, the event planner. She answered, cheerful as always, asking about final payments and details. But I wasn't calling about money this time. I was calling to make sure that on the day my daughter tried to erase me, the truth would stand tall where everyone could see it. The night after Desiree's visit, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her words replayed in my mind, sharp as broken glass. "You can come to my wedding, but you can't sit in front. Only people with uniform skin color can snap with us." It was the kind of wound that could hollow out a mother's heart. But instead of crumbling, I let the hurt harden into clarity. If my daughter wanted to erase me, then she would have to face the truth of everything I had done for her, and not behind closed doors, in front of the very people she wanted to impress. I knew exactly what I needed to do. A week earlier, long before she spoke those cruel words, I had already sat down and recorded a video. Something in me must have sensed the storm coming, because I felt compelled to tell my story, not for sympathy, but for dignity. In that video, I sat in front of a simple backdrop, no makeup, no fancy dress, my vitiligo showing in full view. I spoke about my pregnancy, how the disorder first appeared, how Leonard walked away, and how I raised Desiree alone with everything I had. I spoke about the sacrifices, the late nights, the savings, the investments, the Tesla stocks I sold so she could have a wedding most brides only dream of. And I ended by recounting her exact words to me, the ones that cut deepest. I recorded it once with no edits. It was raw, honest, and unshakable. Now, after her visit, I knew that video would not sit in a drawer. It would become the one thing she couldn't silence. The next morning, I called the event planner. Her name was Tasha, a woman I trusted because she had been patient with me through the entire process. She knew how much I had paid, how involved I had been, and she respected the love I carried for my daughter. When she answered the phone, her voice was warm. "Hey, Ms. Ellis, ready for the big day?" "Not quite," I said. My voice was steady, but underneath was steel. "I need to meet with you. Privately. It's important." We met later that afternoon at her office. The air smelled faintly of flowers from the arrangements stacked in the back room. I sat across from her, pulled the flash drive from my purse, and slid it across the desk. She looked at me curiously. "What's this?" she asked. "It's a video," I said. "I need it played at the reception. No one can know until the moment comes." She hesitated. "A surprise video for the bride and groom?" I shook my head. "No, for everyone. It's my story, the truth of what brought us here, and why I won't let my daughter silence me." Her brows furrowed. She plugged in the drive and watched the first few minutes. I saw her expression change, confusion at first, then sympathy, and finally tears sliding down her cheeks. She paused the video and looked at me, her voice thick. "Ms. Ellis, this is powerful. But are you sure? This will change everything." I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "Everything has already changed. My daughter told me I don't belong in her photos. She said only people with uniform skin could stand beside her. After all I've done, after selling almost everything to make this wedding happen, she wants to erase me. I won't stop her wedding, but I will not let her shame me either. This video has to play. Promise me." She reached across the desk and took my hand. "I promise." In that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. The planner saw me. She understood what this meant. And together, we made an unspoken pact. When the music and laughter filled that reception hall, when my daughter thought she had won by excluding me, the truth would rise on that big screen for all to see. I walked out of that office with my head held higher than it had been in weeks. The plan was in motion now, and the one thing Desiree never expected was that the mother she thought she could push into the shadows was about to step into the light. The morning of Desiree's wedding, I didn't dress for a front row seat because I knew I wouldn't be there. I had already accepted that my place had been denied to me, not by circumstance, but by my own child's request. She told me plainly I wasn't fit to sit at the front or be in her photos, and so I stayed away. Still, I had made sure every detail of that day carried my signature. My money paid for it. My sacrifices laid the foundation, and my love had paved the aisle she walked down. From what I was told, the wedding unfolded like a dream at first. The hall I paid for gleamed under crystal chandeliers. White and gold drapery framed the walls. Flowers bloomed across every table, and the music swelled with violins as guests took their seats. It was the kind of celebration brides imagined since childhood, a spectacle that told the world this marriage was blessed and abundant. Desiree herself, she looked radiant, they said. Her lace gown shimmered as she walked down the aisle, veil cascading behind her like a waterfall of light. Cameras flashed, guests rose to their feet, and smiles stretched across faces as she took her vows. To anyone sitting in that room, it was the image of perfection. But even perfection leaves shadows. Guests noticed my absence. An empty chair stood at the front, where a mother should have been. Some whispered about it, wondering if I had fallen ill, if perhaps there had been some last-minute misunderstanding. But there was no illness, no mistake. My absence was intentional, not by me, but by the daughter who thought erasing me would polish her story. I stayed home that day, not because I was weak, but because I had already put another plan in motion. The video I recorded was with the event planner now, scheduled to play when the time was right. While the guests cheered, while the band played, while Desiree floated on her own confidence, I sat in quiet knowing the moment was coming. She believed everything was going smoothly, that her careful mask would hold, that her new family would see nothing but her glow. What she didn't know was that the wedding wasn't hers alone. I had built it, paid for it, and now I would reclaim the piece of it she tried to deny me. She thought she had silenced me with an empty chair, but the silence would not last. My voice was waiting in that room, ready to speak when she least expected it. I wasn't there when the music stopped and the lights dimmed, but I know how it unfolded. The event planner told me later, and others confirmed it in hushed calls and messages that followed. One moment, the band was playing and laughter filled the room. The next, the chandeliers dimmed, and every eye turned toward the screen at the front of the hall. The guests expected a slideshow of the couple's journey or a surprise tribute. Desiree herself leaned in with a smile, ready to bask in more attention. But when the projector came to life, it wasn't her face on the screen. It was mine. There I sat, recorded days earlier, my vitiligo visible in the soft light, no makeup, no filters, just me. My voice carried through the hall with a steadiness I felt even as I spoke into that camera. My name is Marjorie Ellis. I am Desiree's mother. I told them my story, how childbirth had left its mark on me in ways deeper than scars, how my immune system betrayed me and stripped the pigment from my skin, how my husband walked away because of it, leaving me to raise my daughter alone. I explained what it meant to live under whispers and stares, to keep my head high, while people treated me like an object of pity or disgust. And then I shifted to the sacrifices. I spoke of the years I worked late, saved every dollar, and invested wisely. How those Tesla stocks I bought when people mocked electric cars grew into the foundation that funded this very wedding. I listed it plainly: the hall, the gown, the catering, the flowers, the honeymoon. Nearly every luxury in that room had been paid for by the woman they didn't see in the front row. The room grew heavy as I spoke, but the silence broke when I repeated Desiree's words. A few days ago, my daughter told me I could come to this wedding, but I could not sit in the front. I could not be in the family photos. She said only people with uniform skin color could snap with them. The planner told me there were gasps, hands covering mouths, eyes darting toward Desiree, where she sat frozen in her chair. Murmurs rippled through the guests like a wave, disbelief and anger mixing in their voices. Some shook their heads. Others leaned away from her as though her shame might rub off on them. In the video, I did not cry. I did not plead. I looked straight into the camera, into the eyes of every person in that hall, and said, I gave my daughter everything. I raised her alone. I carried her through storms, and I built this day with my sacrifices. But I was told I am not good enough to stand beside her, not because I failed as a mother, but because my skin carries a condition I never asked for. Tonight, I refuse to be erased. When the screen went dark, the silence was sharper than any applause could have been. The planner told me no one moved for several seconds, as if the weight of my words pinned them to their seats. Then whispers began again, louder this time, pointed and condemning. The joy that once filled that room had evaporated, replaced with the truth I had placed before them. I wasn't there to watch Desiree's smile collapse, but I didn't need to be. I knew exactly how it must have felt for her. The mask cracking, the admiration slipping from her grasp, the spotlight shifting to the mother she thought she had erased. That was my voice, my truth, my dignity rising on the very stage she tried to keep me from. I wasn't in that hall to see the faces myself, but word reached me quickly. The event planner called me the very next morning, her voice still heavy with the weight of what had unfolded. Others who had been there confirmed the same story. A wedding that had started like a fairy tale had ended like a funeral. As soon as the video ended, silence stretched across the room. No one clapped, no one cheered. The joy that had filled the air earlier had vanished, leaving only tension thick enough to choke on. People turned in their seats, eyes darting toward Desiree, waiting for her to explain what they had just heard. But she couldn't. There was no explanation that could undo the cruelty of her words now laid bare before everyone. The first to rise were her in-laws. The groom's mother stood, her chair scraping back across the floor. She turned not to Desiree, but to her son, and said quietly but firmly, "We will not be part of this." Her husband followed, shaking his head in disbelief, his expression one of deep disappointment. Without another word, they walked toward the doors. Their departure was deliberate, measured, and all the more powerful because of it. The planner told me it was like watching dominoes fall. Once the groom's parents walked out, their relatives followed. Aunts, uncles, cousins, some of whom had traveled long distances to attend. Friends who had once laughed and danced with Desiree minutes earlier gathered their purses and coats. Neighbors I had known since Desiree was a child stood and quietly excused themselves. Even the photographer lowered his camera, no longer eager to capture what had become of the evening. One by one, tables emptied. The music stopped, the servers froze, and the room thinned out until only a handful of guests remained. Those who stayed did so out of politeness, their faces heavy with judgment, their conversations hushed and sharp. The once celebratory hall was collapsing before Desiree's eyes, transformed into a chamber of shame. I heard later how she sat stiff in her chair, her smile broken, her hands trembling as she tried to maintain composure. She reached for her husband's hand, but he didn't lift his eyes to meet hers. He couldn't. His family had already walked away, and with them went the approval she craved more than anything else. By the end of the night, the grand hall I had paid for, filled with flowers and music, stood nearly empty. Plates of untouched food sat cold on the tables, glasses of champagne bubbled flat, and the laughter that once echoed against the walls had been replaced by whispers of disgust. The dream wedding Desiree had envisioned was gone, undone not by me sitting in the front row, but by her own attempt to erase me. I wasn't there to witness the walkouts, but in some ways that made it more powerful. I didn't need to see it with my own eyes to know what it meant. The people she wanted to impress the most were the ones who left her behind. And the silence that followed her into that night was louder than anything I could have said in person. The morning after the wedding, my phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, messages, whispers carried on the wind. I didn't need to be there to know the truth. The damage had been done. The dream day my daughter had tried to polish into perfection now lived only as a cautionary tale of pride and betrayal. By Sunday afternoon, the stories had already spread. Guests replayed the video for those who hadn't been there. Screenshots of quotes from my speech made their way onto phones. The words uniform skin color traveled faster than the music or the vows. Desiree, who had stepped into marriage hoping to impress, now found herself exposed as a woman who shamed her own mother. And then came Monday. Her boss had been at the wedding, sitting close enough to watch the entire collapse. I didn't know the man personally, but I didn't need to. The planner told me he was one of the first to walk out, his face grim with disappointment. By Monday morning, he called Desiree into his office. She thought she could explain, thought she could smooth it over the way Leonard had taught her, with a soft smile and the right words. But this time, charm wasn't enough. By noon, she was unemployed. The company couldn't risk being tied to the scandal, not after it had played out in front of so many witnesses. What she thought was just a private wound between mother and daughter had become public record, and public record has consequences. Meanwhile, I did my part. Every financial access she had through me, I closed. The credit cards I had given her over the years, blocked. The accounts I had allowed her to draw from, frozen. Even the honeymoon package I had booked in advance, canceled with one phone call. I wasn't about to finance a getaway for a woman who told me I wasn't fit to sit in her photos. It wasn't cruelty, it was justice. I had given her everything she asked for, more than she deserved, and in return, she had tried to erase me. Now she would learn what it meant to stand on her own, without the foundation I had laid. In less than 48 hours, her world shifted from abundance to scarcity. The grand wedding hall, the glowing photographs, the expensive gown, none of it could shield her from reality. Without a job, without financial support, without the approval of her in-laws, she found herself standing in the ruins of the life she thought she had built. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to shout. My silence did the work for me. She called dozens of times, but I didn't answer. She texted apologies, begging me to talk, promising it was all a misunderstanding. But how do you misunderstand a sentence like the one she said to me? You can come, but you can't sit in front. Only people with uniform skin color can snap with us. No, that wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was a choice. And choices have consequences. By Monday evening, the girl who had walked down the aisle glowing in lace now sat in her apartment with canceled honeymoon tickets, frozen cards, and a job she no longer held. Her husband's silence added another weight. He couldn't shield her from the storm. He had watched his parents walk out, watched his family's respect crumble, and now he had to face the truth. The woman he married had humiliated the very mother who gave her everything. For me, it wasn't revenge for the sake of pain. It was restoration. I had lived too long carrying shame that wasn't mine. This time, the shame fell exactly where it belonged. The calls didn't stop. After the wedding collapse, after the walkouts, after her job slipped through her fingers, Desiree turned her desperation toward me. Every hour, my phone lit up with her name. Each voicemail carried a different tone. First anger, then pleading, then sobs. She begged me to pick up, to let her explain, to forgive her. But forgiveness is not a bandage you slap over a wound that deep. 2 days later, she came to my door. I heard the knock before I saw her face through the peephole. There she was, the same daughter I had raised with every ounce of love inside me, standing on my porch in tears. Mascara streaked her cheeks, her shoulders trembling as she called my name. Mom, Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I was wrong. Her voice cracked, the kind of crack that once would have split me open as a mother. But this time, I stood still behind the door. I thought of the words she had said so easily. You can come, but you can't sit in front. Only people with uniform skin color can snap with us. She hadn't stumbled through them. She hadn't said them in a moment of anger. She had rehearsed them, delivered them like a condition for my presence in her life. And no amount of tears could erase that truth. So I did nothing. I didn't open the door. I didn't answer her cries. I let her knock until her fists grew weak, until her voice turned hoarse, until the silence of the street swallowed her sobs. She left eventually, her shadow disappearing down the walkway. For the first time in her life, she learned what it meant to be shut out. Days passed before she heard from me again. Not a call, not a visit, but a letter. I wrote it with steady hands, no anger in my pen, no wavering in my heart. The envelope carried only her name, but inside was the final truth. Desiree, I carried you into this world. I raised you when no one else stood beside me. I gave you food when I had none left for myself. I sold what I owned so you could shine in front of others. And in return, you told me I was not good enough to stand beside you. From this day forward, I release you. You are no longer my responsibility, no longer my child. Do not come to my door again. Do not call my name. The bond we had is broken by your choice, not mine. Consider this the last gift I will ever give you. Freedom from me and freedom for me. Marjorie Ellis. It was short, but it was final. A mother's disownment is not an empty threat. It is the severing of a cord that once gave life. I mailed it knowing the weight it would carry, knowing that when she opened it, her tears would fall on paper instead of on my shoulder. The event planner told me later that Desiree showed up at her office, clutching the letter, shaking as she read it aloud. She couldn't believe I had written it, but disbelief doesn't change truth. I had given her my everything, and now I had given her nothing. For me, the silence that followed was not empty. It was peace. When all the noise settled, the collapsed wedding, the calls unanswered, the letter delivered, I found myself in a silence I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, the kind that used to press on my chest when Leonard left. This was different. It was the silence of peace, the kind that comes when you've laid down every burden that was never yours to carry. For decades, people had stared at my skin as though it told the whole story of who I was. White patches against brown flesh, scattered like maps across my hands and face. They saw disease, difference, something they didn't understand. But I knew better. Each patch was a testament to survival, to the child I carried, the nights I pushed through exhaustion, the mornings I woke up determined to keep going. My vitiligo wasn't shame. It was a crown I hadn't asked for, but one I learned to wear. Desiree tried to strip me of that dignity when she told me I couldn't sit in the front, when she said my skin disqualified me from her photos. But in trying to erase me, she revealed more about herself than she ever could about me. She showed the world that her love was conditional, her respect fragile, her loyalty shallow. And in the end, the shame she tried to put on me settled squarely on her own shoulders. I walk now with no need to hide. I don't layer makeup thick over my skin. I don't bow my head when people stare. If they look, let them look. My body tells a story of pain, yes, but also of power. because it was with this body that I worked 2 jobs, with these hands that I cooked meals, with this face that I smiled through whispers, with this heart that I raised a daughter who had every chance in the world. And when that daughter chose betrayal, I chose dignity. That is the difference between us. She leaned on appearances, the perfect gown, the glamorous haul, the photographs designed to impress strangers. I leaned on truth, on sacrifice, on scars that could not be polished away. In the end, beauty fades, perfection cracks, and shallow acceptance vanishes. But dignity endures. It carries you through storms and stands taller than betrayal. I don't tell this story for pity. I tell it as proof. Proof that even when those closest to you turn their back, even when your own child says you're not enough, you can still walk forward with your head high. Betrayal may scar, but it cannot define you. The world may call you broken, but dignity says otherwise. So this is where my story ends. Not in shame, not in loss, but in resilience. I walk with my vitiligo body, spotted, imperfect, and unashamed. Because the truth is what I carry on my skin is nothing compared to what I carry in my spirit. And that no daughter, no man, no voice of poison can ever take away.